Welcome to a special edition of Legal AF. I'm Karen Friedman Agnifilo, and I am so honored today to be joined by former Congressman from Illinois, Adam Kinzinger. In addition to being a former Republican congressman, you did 3 tours in Iraq, you fly airplanes, and now I see you on CNN along with me regularly, and you're commentating on things. The thing that made me want to have you on this show, and I'm so appreciative that you're here, thank you so much, is really your role of being one of 2 Republicans on the House Select Committee, along with Liz Cheney. You did absolute hero's work in bringing the facts of that case or that entire matter to the public's attention. You really kicked the Department of Justice, in the rear. They didn't seem to be doing anything to investigate or even have a major investigation into the upper echelons of people from January 6th. They were going after the people the insurrectionists who breached the Capitol and who created violence and that sort of thing. But really the masterminds, the lawyers, the Rudy Giuliani's, the Mark Meadows, John Eastman, Mr. Cheeseborough, Boris Epstein, all those individuals, along with, of course, Donald Trump. It didn't appear that was happening until the work of the Select Committee. And it really, I think, just more than anything, has painted a picture for the history books, for our great-grandchildren to really understand what that day meant, in addition to the violence, in addition to the broken windows, in addition to that, just really what it meant on a deep level in terms of our democracy and just how this will be the defining, I think, political moment of our generation. And I really wanted to have you on to talk about that. The listeners that we typically have are mostly Democrat, and they're mostly, people who are very much in that camp. And, we don't have a lot of Republicans on, but, when I was doing research to ask you questions, I was like, okay, I don't agree with a lot that you do, your policies, your Republican type policies. I agree with some, but a lot I don't. But I was like, wow, this guy's a hero. I want him to run for president. I was really, really impressed with kind of what you had to say and who you are as a person. And I wanted to just talk a little bit about that. And I wanted you to share with us kind of what motivated you, how hard was it, and what made you kind of do that, and break away from your party. You were one of 2 Republicans on that committee. And if you could just talk a little bit about that, we'd really appreciate it from your perspective.
Yeah, you bet. It's good to be with you, by the way. And look, I'll say this: I never wanted to be on the committee. It was funny because, at the very beginning, there was this rumor that Nancy Pelosi was going to put a Republican on there in like one of her Democratic seats. And I just remember thinking, like, please God, not me. It's either me or Liz, right? And I'm like, be Liz. And it was. So I thought I was pretty good. I thought I was clear. And then, because obviously you look at it, it's like, look, I want this work done, but if it can be done without me, that would be great. And
why did you think it was either you or Liz? What was it about you that put you in the running?
Yeah, we were the most outspoken. And, there were 10 people that voted to impeach Trump. And then 8 of them kind of started to go into, I don't mean this meanly, but kind of self-preservation mode. And it's—
You mean 10 Republicans?
Yeah, the other 8, all except for basically me and Liz kind of went quiet after that because they're like, okay, I did my duty. Now I need to try to get reelected. And I understand that, it's like the person that does 1 tour in Vietnam and doesn't go back. Like, it's still a heroic thing. And I understand why you wouldn't go back for a second tour. And, and then plus I think we were the only 2 that voted for the creation of this committee. So you remember we went through all those iterations of like an independent committee or a commission. Then there was this kind of committee that was going to be even, that Republicans turned against. And so then Pelosi kind of put forward like her version of it, which ended up being fine. And so anyway, I didn't want to do it. But then when, McCarthy kind of threw that fit and he pulled his Republicans off, and I knew at that point I was technically the only Republican that actually occupied a Republican seat on the committee because Liz had a Democratic seat. I knew I would get it, and I knew that was going to happen. And I also knew, I thought about it over the weekend because it was kind of coming up on a weekend. And I just remember thinking, like, do I want to do this? No. But could I not do it? And the answer is no. Like, I'm a big believer in your legacy matters when you're given an opportunity to serve in any capacity, but particularly in this capacity. Like, you want to be able at the end of your life to say that you did everything you could with that moment. And so I knew I couldn't say no. And it was a difficult decision, but once it was made, once I made the decision to do it, which I knew from the very beginning I would say yes, but I still kind of went through that in my mind. Once I made that decision, I never looked back. And
What was it? What was it about that moment that was so profound for you that you knew you had to do it?
I mean, look,
I mean,
I've been all over the world, both as a congressman, because my actual real passion is foreign policy, energy, foreign policy issues, like the strength of America around the globe. So I've been all over the world as a foreign affairs committee member, obviously as a military member. And what I recognize is that, like, democracy is actually the hardest form of government. We're used to it because we were raised in it, but it's actually the hardest way to have it. It's much easier to have a dictator because you don't have to do anything.
What do you mean by that?
So, like, if you have a country with a dictator, like, you don't have to be an educated citizen. You don't have to have an opinion because the dictator does all the work for you. Now, it always fails, but it's an easy form of government. Self-governance, it requires two main things. Number one is a basically elected, educated electorate on issues so that they can vote. But the main thing is it requires a basic level of trust among different parties. So Democrats and Republicans, let's take our democracy here. We don't have to agree on anything. I don't have to agree on tax rates, nothing. You don't have to agree on issues. What we have to agree on is that we're going to play by the rules of democracy, the rules of the Constitution, how elections are done. The second that is violated and that trust, that basic compact is destroyed, I think it makes democracy and self-governance damn near impossible. And so I knew that, look, democracies aren't defined by bad days. We're defined by how we come back from bad days because everybody has bad days. And I knew that if we couldn't restore a basic level of trust and understanding in democracy, we were in real trouble. And I had just had a new kid. He's 18 months now. So back then, I guess he was like 0 almost. And I knew that, look, he's got 70 years, 80, 90 years from here that he's got to live in this country. And I just knew I couldn't look at myself and have turned down that moment. And by the way, I think there's a lot of people, no matter how outspoken they have or haven't been, that are going to have real regrets in the future when they're alone with their thoughts. And, I had been very outspoken against Trump pretty much the whole time I was in Congress, but I always played just enough to not to go over the line so that I could get reelected. You have to play that a little bit. But the day of the election, I was calling out QAnon early, that kind of stuff. But when that election happened and he tweeted something about stop the votes and this is being stolen, that shatters that basic compact. And that's when I was completely off the train.
What was that like? I mean, as a Republican in Congress with other Republicans, I mean, what was that like to be one of the lone voices? Like, and why weren't there more?
Well, first off, what it was like, it was very angering because, why do I have to be you guys know this stuff. Like, and this is me talking to them. It's like, you guys know, this is wrong. What you're doing is stupid. Like, what? So it was very angering. It was confusing, obviously, because I always thought, regardless of Republican beliefs, I always thought humans in general had a red line they wouldn't cross. We can go so far, we can compromise so far, but there's a point at which I'm not going to compromise like basic values and what I believe. I saw that wasn't true. So it was like a total shift on my view of humanity. But I still always held out hope and probably would have put all my money on in a wager in Vegas if I had to, that the Republican Party would wake up. There's no way that this can continue because it's just insane. Well, that would have been a wager I lost. And, that depends how long the timeline was, but I certainly wouldn't have made any money in the near future. And so it was confusing. It was angering. And also, I have learned in my time in Congress that when you do things and you're kind of standing against the crowd, it's actually the moments you're most proud of. So I always consistently voted, which I thought was an easy vote, but for like the Violence Against Women Act. Not a ton of Republicans did. That was some of my proudest votes. Gun control measures that I voted on and for. Those are some of my proudest votes. Voting for infrastructure, voting the only Republican to vote for the CHIPS Act, because what it says to you is it's not necessarily the policy that makes you proud. It's the fact that you can do it, right? That you have the courage to stand up. And so, yeah, it's a little of disappointment, but it's also a little bit of reaffirming that I know that I can stand against pressure.
Were there people who, and I'm not asking you to name names unless you want to, were there any other Republicans who would tell you privately that they agreed with you, but said they couldn't come out publicly and do it because they were worried about getting reelected?
Oh my gosh, so many, so many. I mean, they kind of quit doing it towards the end because nobody was like worried I was going to out them, because I won't, personal conversations. But I think they were more ashamed than anything, because the crazier it got, at the beginning, what I would do, I'd have people that come and say like, hey, your vote for impeachment was courageous. I couldn't do it because, man, my district would have torched me. I'm like, you don't know my district. My district is torching me for this. I was originally elected in a swing district, and it became a pretty heavily Trump district. And, but I'm like, it's not, I get compromising on some votes, because it is politics, but this is not one of those. And, literally everybody would come up to me, with the exception of the absolute real weirdos. But that kind of went quiet at the end, because I think people were just more ashamed to even admit that they're not doing anything. So yeah, that was a common thing. I still shake my head at people that would come up and say that. I guess I'm glad they did, but I wish they'd have actually done something about it.
What is the draw to Trump? What is it? What is it? Do you have a theory about why he is not just, and I'm not even just saying the people who are going along with it because they're worried about getting reelected and they don't want to piss off his base and then therefore their base. What is it about him just generally that has got this cult-like following?
Man, we could spend an hour going into the dynamics of this, but I'll give you the top lines. First off, on elected officials, the ones that don't really believe it, it's a matter of, okay, I'm going to get kicked out of the tribe if I turn against Trump. And what they'll do instead, and you see it happen a lot, is they just don't run again, but they don't speak out, because they recognize that, okay, I'm not going to run again, so I'm going to remove myself from this situation. But if I speak out, it's going to hurt me in the future on lobby jobs. It's going to hurt me on, my ability to go to DC and keep these relationships up with Republicans so that I can turn that into a profit. But on the base side, look, I come from a religious background where there was always this idea that it's the end of the world. The machine, the world is out to get you. It's where you hear about like these idea of globalism. Some people think that's a tripe for, like Jewish, and I guess to some people it is. Growing up, globalism, when I heard it, meant like one world government, like end times, right? So there's always this like paranoia and fear. And there's always a feeling, and I think some of this is legitimate, like in the Midwest, that like the Midwest has been forgotten. But what happens is, when people are miserable or they're down and out, that's when you need a leader to come along and actually provide optimism and provide hope and provide a way out. Instead, you can have somebody come along and use the dark arts, right? The dark arts are like taking your fear, reflecting your fear back to you, and telling you that your fears are founded, not that they're unfounded. And so that's what Donald Trump did. He showed up, he reflected people's fears back to them. They liked that. He didn't care about what the polite thing to do was. They liked that. They liked his attitude, his I don't give an F, I'm going to break the system, I'm going to blow it up. And then what happens once you're in that kind of cult, you can't vary in anything anymore. So now you want to belong, because I actually think humans fear death less than they fear being kicked out of a tribe. I think they fear death less than they fear like losing friendships and, getting those text messages that I got and still continue to get, by the way, from people I thought were friends. And so you have this like kind of view that you have to be within. Whatever Donald Trump says today is what you have to believe. Now, if all of a sudden somebody that's in this kind of MAGA world says, I do believe there are some reasonable restrictions on guns we should do to stop school shootings and stop mass shootings, well, all of a sudden you've gone out of that, what that silo is for MAGA, and you get excommunicated. I mean, Mike Pence today is getting excommunicated, and that guy did more to carry water for Donald Trump than anybody. So you now have to just conform totally because you don't want to be kicked out of the tribe. There's 1,000 more dynamics I could go into, but I think that's kind of the 50,000 foot overview of why people were initially attracted to Trump and why they can't leave him now. And by the way, in that, the way to soothe your conscience is because once you give a little piece of your soul, you give a little more of your soul, then you're willing to give your whole soul. It's the sunken cost fallacy. We can't leave Vietnam because we've already lost 10,000 men. So we can't leave now. So you keep investing men in Vietnam and you lose anyway. That's what people feel. And if you at any point stop and you walk away from the Trump movement, you have to admit what you did. And I mean, I still get it all the time. Like, honestly, in Congress, I was one of the most anti-Trump congressmen the whole time Trump was president. But I still get people that are like, well, you supported him once and you once did this. And like, yeah, I get it. And this is why people are scared to leave the Trump movement, because now they're going to have to answer to all this. It's much better to be in the confines of people that are going to reflect back to you how moral you are.
There are many people who believe that these indictments have actually made him more powerful and have made his base stronger. Yet at the same time, you can't really just walk away and let him get away with what he does, right? So what are your thoughts on that?
I think within the party, it's probably made him a little stronger because it's this rally around the flag. They're going after our guy, and of course, Republican leaders are not out there talking about the impartiality of the justice system. They're just more than happy to feed into this garbage because it gets them reelected. And frankly, it's great for fundraising, which is a whole nother issue. And so I think they're looking at this and going, we can't speak out on it. It's making him a little stronger at the moment. I think it will kill him with the general election, but I'm always cautious to say that because I think this is a lot closer than a lot of people think. I think there is still a good chance Donald Trump could win the election. But I think there's no doubt we can't deny justice simply because we don't want to make Donald Trump stronger. Because I think we never want to be a country that just prosecutes old administrations. That's a banana republic. But we also can't, I think more importantly, be a country that allows failed coups without punishment. Like, there's got to be punishment for this, or there's no incentive to not try this every 4 years, because the deal is, as long as you fail, it's okay. And if you succeed, you're in charge anyway. So I guess makes them a little stronger, but sometimes the fire burns hottest before it's out.
What was when you did your big investigation and you did the 8 public hearings that we all got to see? There was a lot we didn't see. What surprised you the most, if anything, when you dug deep into all the facts? What was the thing that was most shocking to you and probably most serious of all?
Well, the thing that really opened my eyes which is kind of what this indictment is based on, it was that January 6th was a symptom. And January 6th, it was a bad day. Obviously, I was there. It was terrible. It never should happen again. And it was sent a really bad message to the world. But the rot was all before that day. On January 1st, we had a Republican conference call, and we're all talking. And Kevin McCarthy says his lines or whatever. And I get on the phone. I'm the first person to talk. And I just said, Kevin, we are convincing people that the election was stolen. Listen, if I really believed the election was stolen, this is me speaking, Adam Kinzinger, I would be out there like trying to overthrow the government, because that's our responsibility according to the Constitution. So if you convince people that this is legit, you have to expect violence. I said, I think there's going to be violence on January 6th. And Kevin just simply said, okay, Adam, next caller. I'm like, all right, well, not taking it seriously. So the thing that surprised me the most was not just because, the stuff I had seen publicly from the Texas lawsuit, et cetera, trying to delegitimize the election was one thing. But seeing behind the scenes, the level to which Donald Trump himself knew what was going on and participated. Because I think there was a case to be made before our committee really put our findings out that, like, oh, look, Donald Trump is dumb or he doesn't know what he's doing, and this kind of happened. And I was like, okay, well, what we showed is, I mean, the thing that the craziest thing was him sitting there with Department of Justice officials, his new acting attorney general, and saying, look, just say the election was corrupt and leave the rest to me and the Republican congressman. Let's parse that apart. He's saying, look, all I need is the Department of Justice stamp that puts some doubt in this election, and then you can be quiet. You don't have to say another word, because we will exploit that doubt in the minds of the American people. And you see that pattern in Donald Trump everywhere. You see it in Ukraine. You see it in every issue that Donald Trump has ever talked about. That kind of attitude permeated all these kind of second-tier corrupt officials that I hope eventually get indicted. That to me was probably the biggest surprise, is just how deep and sinister this really was. It wasn't just some kind of violence that came out of misunderstandings.
Do you think Trump believes he won and that it was stolen?
It's a good question, because I hear people that know him better than I give both answers. My view is, I believe that he knows it wasn't stolen, but I believe in some extent he has convinced himself, because if I recently just heard something about truly explaining like narcissistic personality disorder, and it was like, you have to convince yourself as a narcissist of false things in order to soothe your conscience. So I think if you put him on truth serum, he would probably say the election wasn't stolen, but I think he pretends in his mind every day, which is why he can be so good at talking about it, that it was. And so, yeah, I think he's just, the guy's, look, literally the guy's nuts. I think we just need to be clear. He's clinically insane. You can tell by his tweets. He's wishing Nancy Pelosi to hell because she, quote unquote, said something mean about him. He said that in his, crazy app or whatever. The guy's nuts. He's literally insane. My wife worked for the White House, by the way, mostly for the Pence administration, and she would come home and talk about the stuff going on in the White House. And look, ladies and gentlemen, we're not talking about just weird policies. We're talking about completely inept actions in the White House, complete inability to do anything normal in the White House, like this weird Hunger Games among the staff in the White House. Like,
what do you mean?
man, if you just like everybody's turning against each other. Donald Trump kind of fed that I don't know, that competition. People could just walk in and talk to Donald Trump. Whoever the last person to talk to him would basically control policy. Like for me, I got called into his office pretty early on when he was talking about leaving Syria. And it was like me and 5 others trying to convince him to stay. You can't leave the Kurds, all this kind of stuff. And the reason we were called in is because John Bolton wanted us to be the last person he talked to. We got called in twice, in fact, because I think probably Rand Paul got in his ear after us the first time, because that's how he governed. The last people to talk to him is what he would be for. And that's just nuts. That's like, you can't have a leader that way. And I think the thing that blows me away the most is this like kind of idea of an alpha male culture. It's like, fine, whatever. That's not Donald Trump. Like, Donald Trump is the most scared, the most weak, the most unsure of himself person out there, but he's a good actor.
Fascinating. What do you think he did while he was president, aside from this, the rot and the Jan 6 thing, that was the most dangerous or worst thing he did?
Well, I for sure, the destruction of our foreign policy. I mean, creating a lack of faith in our intel, creating a lack of faith in the FBI. He did a lot of that after, but remember, even during, he would talk about this Russia hoax, which, by the way, wasn't a hoax, but they did win the verbal argument on that one, because Bill Barr came out pretty early before Mueller had a chance to explain his report. Mueller didn't say there was no collusion. He said there was collusion, but he said it's up to Congress to decide what to do here. So kind of, I got concerns about that anyway. But his delegitimizing of the federal government, when people lose faith in institutions, it creates real instability. And then standing next to Vladimir Putin and telling him, you believe him over the intel agencies about meddling in the election. Like, that's nuts. Yeah. I mean, the attempt to extort Ukraine, that's nuts. I think that stuff was among some of the most dangerous things he did, because I think we're still recovering both our faith among the American people in our foreign policy and our institutions, but also among our allies.
Who do you think had his ear the most? Who did he listen to the most besides the last person in the room?
I think, and this is why I was pretty sad we couldn't talk to him, because he avoided us and resisted the subpoena. But Dan Scavino, I think, played a very important role. So Dan was like his internet whisperer. So anytime, I would watch Twitter a lot, and I could tell when conspiracy theories were popping up. Like, I was the first to know about the Ray Epps conspiracy, and I was kind of among the first in Congress to talk about QAnon. I could see this stuff happening. And then Trump would tweet something that most people would look at and go like, well, what's he talking about? And I would know exactly what he was talking about because I saw it like kind of rising up as a conspiracy on Twitter. And Dan Scavino was that guy that was like monitoring it, that would put out a lot of his tweets, that would feed to Trump what was going on. And I have no proof of this. So, because we couldn't talk to Dan Scavino, we couldn't get these records. But I wouldn't be surprised to find out that whether it's the Oath Keepers, the 3%, or some of those groups, that maybe there were conversations between Dan Scavino and them. I don't know, but I do know that Dan Scavino was certainly the Trump whisperer when it came to internet issues.
Why do you think Trump is doing all this? Why is he tearing down our institutions? Why is he making the conspiracy theorists kind of, taking them out of the dark shadows and making them kind of mainstream, and really trying to destroy our country? To what end? What is it that he's trying to do?
He's a narcissist. It's him. There's no empathy for anything. There's no empathy for the country. I mean, my guess is probably a significant amount of our presidents have been narcissists, right? You got to be to run for president to an extent, but they're not narcissists to the point where they're going to burn down the country. They understand that their job and their moment in history is to try to make the country better. Some have, some haven't, but they do their best as flawed people. Donald Trump doesn't care about any of that. All he cares about is himself. Now, I once heard the anecdote that, when Donald Trump became president, there were a few of us that were like, okay, the guy has no morals, so maybe this is an opportunity for him to like actually get things done that can compromise between Republicans and Democrats. We need an infrastructure bill. Maybe he can do something on guns. He has no values, so maybe he can just find the middle ground in all these issues. And I think he wanted to do that. And then Nancy Pelosi, as she should have, went against him on something. And that became so personal to him that now he all of a sudden just became vehemently opposed to her and Chuck Schumer. And he went to the people that would reflect back to him. Again, a narcissistic personality seeks this out. People that reflect back his own things that he needs to make himself feel good, that tell him how good he is. And that, of course, was the far right. They were happy to do that. Initially, they manipulated Donald Trump, and then now Donald Trump owns them. And so I think that's all it is. I think it is all about himself. He can't be seen as a loser, and he has no empathy for anything but himself. And I think that's really the best explanation of why he's doing what he's doing.
So you were there on January 6th. Tell us about that.
Well, I mean, it was a terrible day. It was, I went in, I actually had my staff stay home because I was predicting violence, and my wife stayed home. So I went into the office by myself and actually went to the floor for the start of the proceedings and left pretty quick, only because they were starting to put people in the second floor of the House of Reps, and because of social distancing, I didn't want to go sit up there. So I just went back to watch it in my office. And by the time I got to my office, we were getting real indications that stuff was going down. And the weird thing is, the alarm systems weren't going off. They did go off when they found the pipe bombs, but that was the last time we heard from anything in the Capitol complex, because everybody was so deeply engaged in defending it. And we also obviously recognized that there were real issues with kind of the security protocol in the Capitol. That's for another conversation. But as I go to my office, I open my window behind my desk, which actually oversees the west front of the Capitol, where all the warfare was happening. And I just heard boom, pop, bang, pow. And that happened to be right when the DC Metro Police showed up. And by the way, they're heroes. If they just showed up 10 minutes later, the Capitol would have been destroyed. They showed up and defended the Capitol, which allowed Capitol Police to retreat inside the Capitol. And I sat there at a moment. That's when we got the shelter in place order. I had my gun with me, which I never usually took to the Capitol because there were so many police, but I did that day. And I
Because
put it
you
out.
thought there might be violence.
Yeah, exactly. I didn't necessarily know it was going to be in the Capitol. I thought it could be outside the Capitol, and I have to get to and from work. But at that point, I could have left it in my desk, I suppose, but I put my gun out on my desk just to have it there. I had my everything locked, and I looked at Twitter, and there's people tweeting like, Kinzinger, we're coming to get you. Where's your office? Or we know where your office is, and because I had been pretty outspoken. And you'll learn this with fundamentalists. They hate people in their own side more that they see as apostates than they do the other side. So somebody like me is a greater enemy to the MAGA movement than Nancy Pelosi or AOC even. And so I expected there's about 30 minutes when I saw everybody in the Capitol. My wife had called and told me that C-SPAN had a bunch of cameras. I go on cspan.org. I'm looking at the rotunda or statuary hall, which is kind of right by the House floor, and I saw the advent of people coming in. And at that point, you realize when they breach the perimeter of the Capitol, there's literally nothing, if they know what they're doing and where they're going, there's nothing that stops them from coming to my office. Because the only thing then within that complex is maybe a checkpoint with 2 officers, which they just broke a police line. Those 2 officers aren't going to be anything. And so there's about 30 minutes where I thought I may have to actually defend myself here. And then it became, I don't think there was anything that happened where I kind of felt a little more comfortable. I guess I just did eventually. And then, we lasted through that with the rest of America. And then that night I went and gave a speech on the floor when the proceedings reopened. And I was angry. I was upset. I was pissed. I was talking about the emperor has no clothes. This guy's bad. And I remember when my speech was done, I've never given a speech on the floor of the House where you don't hear somebody behind you kind of say like, good job or something. Like there's always a little feedback at the end. It was dead silence after the speech. And that hit me as like, nobody is saying good job. That means nobody's changed their mind. And I walked out of there and I was like, this is going to be bad. And, people would ask me for a while, like, what did you feel going back to the floor of the House, when it reopened? And initially, because I think I was still in somewhat shock, I would always say like, it was the majesty of democracy and I'm glad we were surviving. That's totally untrue as I thought about it. When I went to the floor of the House, it was nothing like that. There was no like emotion about the majesty of democracy. I was pissed and I was angry.
What were you angry
that's
about?
what I thought about. I was angry because these misled people, and when I say they're misled, I don't mean to take any agency away from them, but it's also to put it on the leaders as well. These misled people were convinced that this election was stolen. And there were people hunkering down on the floor of the House of Representatives who did this because they went along with this lie. Even if they didn't say it, they went along with it. Markwayne Mullin from Oklahoma, I remember talking to him a day or two after. And I told him, so it's a weird thing because as this was going down, yeah, I'm a spiritual person, but I'm not like somebody that walks around and can feel evil, right? Or anything like that. But I felt a darkness that I can't explain, but it was very real. It was this sense of like real darkness that I felt for maybe 10 seconds when all this started that day. I told this to Markwayne Mullin, and he said, you know what's interesting, Adam? Because he went and talked to all the police officers after this, and he goes, every one of them looked at me and said there was evil in that crowd. And I'm like, well, that's interesting. Markwayne Mullin is now one of the biggest defenders of Donald Trump, and he's been a denier of January 6th. He knows better. Like that kind of stuff, I for the life of me, is your job really worth it? I mean, Congress doesn't even pay that much. I mean, it's not bad. And and frankly, walking into a room and being the congressman is cool for about 6 months, and then that wears off. Like, what is it about? And I think when we talk about identity and tribe, when you're a member of Congress, that is your identity, no matter where you go, with the exception of your family. And even in that case, you're always a congressman. You're always the center of attention. And I think people are scared to death to lose that.
When you were in your room, in your office, and had your gun out and you were kind of watching what was happening, was there any part of you as a former combat veteran who wanted to go out and physically defend the Capitol?
Yeah, oh yeah, I would have loved to. I knew that. I knew that the second they saw me out there, I would be the target. But there's also, yeah, there was a sense of that, of like anger, and I want to go fight with these guys. There's also a sense of like, I've got to just survive. And I've felt like that a few times in my life, but this was one of those where it's just like, I guess there was no point at which I know a few of my colleagues like called their wives and said, I may not see you, or called their husbands and said that. That I didn't have that sense for whatever reason. I think it was just like, but I did worry that this could be like the end, or I'd be captured or something, whatever.
Yeah.
Uh,
By
there's a
going
lot
out,
of
you would have made it worse by going out because
yeah,
you'd be the target, and then the police officers couldn't do their job. So, but it must have been hard for you instinctually, right? Like to say to yourself, I have to sit here as opposed to go out there and fight, right?
yeah, and you try to make up for that by like, getting to know all the police officers and thanking them, and because they did the work that you, to an extent, you wish you could have done. I got to know Michael Fanone very quickly, and all the other people that you saw testify. Fanone is a great case. He was a Trump supporter, went out there and did his job defending the Capitol, fought his own people, so to speak. Had got beat with Blue Lives Matter flags, and now he even got kicked out of his tribe, and he has police friends that call and tell him that January 6th was fake. And just that's what actually has more psychological torture on people than anything.
Yeah. What do you think of the indictment and that it didn't charge insurrection or seditious conspiracy? And I know you didn't, your committee didn't make a criminal referral for those charges, other than that it should have more investigation. But so many people were charged with seditious conspiracy. What do you think it says to the world that I mean, none of these guys would have done this on their own, right? They did it because of Trump, and yet he wasn't charged with that. What do you think of that?
Well, so initially I was I don't want to say I was pretty upset about it, but I was a little like sad about it, I guess. But as I've thought about it, I'm not too bothered, because look, I think the most important thing Jack Smith can do right now is make the case he can make. So obviously there's a reason I think that either would be harder to make, or that may extend the trial, because I also think the second priority here is getting this done before the election. And so I actually trust his reasoning on this. I also, we saw in the documents case, it may not be the last word. So there still may be charges that come eventually. What I really want to see is that second tier of people charged. I want to see the co-conspirators eventually charged. And I can understand, again, as I've talked to you, frankly, that part of the reason maybe they weren't charged was because that, again, would extend, this court case beyond the election. So let's keep this focused very basically on Trump. But I think history is going to be the greatest judge here. And I think the beneficial work of our committee is that we have set the history books straight.
You really
Um,
have.
and my kid's not going to learn that it was the FBI. He's not going to learn that it was Antifa. He's going to know it was a bunch of Trump supporters that did this. And we feel good about that. And Trump is going to be a stain on our country. I believe that.
Do you have any regrets?
No, I don't have any regrets. I think it's interesting. If you would have told me everything that was going to go down prior to going on the committee, I don't think I would have said no. I would have still gone on the committee, but it would have made the decision a lot harder. So it's probably good I didn't know. But at no point in at any time from election day on have I had an ounce of regret about anything I've spoken out and said. The cost has been high, and there's certainly days where I'm like, you kind of wonder, am I actually the wrong one here? Because how is it that I'm, it's basically me and Liz Cheney. Maybe we got something wrong. But that lasts for about a second until you realize, like, no, there's a giant group of misled people out there. And this is what I would say to, you said most of your listeners are Democrats. Here's a plea I would make. I get it. You don't like a lot of my policies. I'm a pretty moderate Republican, but that's fine. I don't care if you do or don't. There's going to be a lot of people who you don't like their policies. We're going to have plenty of time, if we survive, to debate that stuff. We're going to have plenty of time to fight that stuff over, tax rates, whatever it is. What we don't have time to do is to decide to save our democracy. And what I've had to come to grips with, because I get angry about it, is when you have people that have done so much to empower Donald Trump that now turn against him. Let's take Bill Barr. My natural inclination is to be like, well, screw you, right? You did this and this and this. And I think there's nothing wrong with calling that out. But if we actually want Trumpism to be defeated, the only people that are going to be coming now are those that were in the Trump movement that have seen the light. And so we have to figure out how to do that, not excusing people to account, but also welcoming people into this save democracy moment. I call it a very unsettling, unstable, unnatural alliance between the left, those that are sane on the right, and the middle to save this democracy, because we don't have much time. I really believe I used to be able to always bring sunshine to people at that stuff and say, we're always going to endure. I do believe that, but I believe that that's not a guarantee.
Yeah. Well, I agree with you. I think we have to stop tearing each other down and really try to build each other up and support each other, even when we disagree. And that's one of the reasons I'm such a fan of what you're doing and what you're saying, and your Country First movement and all the rest. Congressman Kinzinger, I am so honored that you agreed to appear on this podcast. I hope you are going to run for president one day. And is there any, before I told you I wouldn't keep you for too long. So is there anything you want to tell us before we leave?
No, look, it was good. It's good working with you on CNN too. You bring a lot of understanding for me with some of these legal procedures and stuff. And I enjoy doing this podcast. And yeah, I'd encourage people to check out Country First. It's country, the number one ST, country1st.com. And we're made up of some Republicans, center, and left. And the whole point is, promoting people that are going to put their country above the interest of the party. And I think we have over 250,000 members now. It's been pretty cool, but we got a lot of work to do, and we can't exhaust ourselves in the process, but we can't give up either.
Thank you so much for joining. It was such a pleasure to talk to you.
Yeah, same. Appreciate it.
Hey, Meidas Mighty. Love this report? Continue the conversation by following us on Instagram @MeidasTouch to keep up with the most important news of the day. What are you waiting for? Follow us now.